While the Biden administration has finally agreed to extend the eviction moratorium for another 60 days, there's still a massive problem looming. And that massive problem is the fact that states do not have the infrastructure in place to distribute the tens of billions of dollars in rental relief money that's been allocated by Congress. Now, David Dayen writes about this in detail in the American Prospect, arguing that I call on all state and local governments to take all possible steps to immediately, by the way, this is from his piece. He's quoting what Biden said, where he says, I call on all state and local governments to take all possible steps to immediately disperse rental assistance funds, Biden declared, referring to the $46.5 billion made available in 2 coronavirus relief packages. Biden continues to say there can be no excuse for any state or locality not accelerating funds to landlords and tenants that have been hurt during this pandemic. But the problem really lies in the way that the legislation was written, because it's incredibly complicated, the terms are difficult to abide by, and it makes the process a lot more difficult for states that just don't have an infrastructure in place to distribute that money. That's part of the reason why in the previous 5 months in which the rental assistance was available, about 3.25 billion has been delivered to tenants and landlords. So 3.25 billion out of 46.5 billion has been distributed. So it gives you a sense of just how dire the situation is. Now, what's the problem? Well, what's holding state governors back, state lawmakers back from distributing the money? Well, it's funny because Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer clearly stated something. While everyone was in Washington urging states to get that rental assistance money out, let me urge everyone in Washington to not delegate to the states to do a job they weren't equipped to do in the first place. That's a quote from Chuck Schumer. So he was apparently very aware of how ill-prepared states were in terms of distributing this money. And Dayen continues to write that it starts with the initial text of the first bill that included rental assistance in December of 2020. On page 2256, it states that payments of rental assistance shall be distributed to state and local governments, not through a federalized program, which I think is a huge problem here. And then on the next page, there's another curious passage suggesting that a landlord or utility provider could not agree to accept payments from a state or local government entity, and the money would have to go directly to the household instead. So the person who needs rental assistance would need to apply for that rental assistance. They'd have to qualify after proving that they're in dire need. And then that money would have to go directly to the individual applying for it, and then that individual would use it to pay their landlord. I have more details about how complicated the distribution policy is, but before I get to it, Cenk, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I don't think it's an accident that they delegated it to the states. I think that they didn't want all of it sent out. Now look, it's obviously a little bit of analysis here, and I don't have a memo saying from Democrats, we don't really want this dispersed too much. But think about the logic. If it's not intentional, then it was negligence. A lot of the states are run by Republicans. They're red states. You know that when you send federal money, whether it's Medicaid money or other kinds of money to the states, unemployment money, they often block it, and they won't give it to their own citizens. In fact, it just happened with COVID relief and unemployment insurance. So don't tell me you didn't know. No, you know that if you say the federal government isn't going to disperse it, the states are going to disperse it, that half of it isn't going to get dispersed because it would help the average American and poor people. And Republicans have no interest in that, and they will block it at the state level.
Can I jump in? Because I think that your theory is definitely credible, and it immediately made me think back to how the bipartisan infrastructure bill is being funded. Because remember, it's a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, but roughly half of it is new spending. So where's the other half coming from? They're essentially reusing money that was appropriated for coronavirus relief efforts. So why didn't that money go to where it was supposed to go in the first place, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so, look, even if I'm not right, and it's just oh, we accidentally gave it to the states where, oh, you're right, the red states aren't gonna give it to people who might get thrown out and get evicted. Well, then that's a massive mistake. That is an unconscionable mistake. Democrats, you don't yet know that Republicans in red states are going to deny any money you send to either the poor or the middle class. If you say you don't know that, you should retire immediately because you apparently have no idea what's happening in politics.
I mean, we covered a story about some of these red states that decided we're gonna cut taxes further for the rich, and we're gonna use coronavirus relief funds to subsidize those tax cuts.
Yeah, I mean, that just happened. How could you not know that, right? And so now I get it. This is part of the COVID relief bill that got passed at the same time as unemployment, et cetera. But it's not like this is a new phenomenon. And so of course, in this case, it's, and by the way, it's a combination of all those things. There's also incompetence at the state level, and there's just that it actually is hard, right? Because they have to set up a new infrastructure to be able to execute this, and they set the law so that you have to jump through several different hoops, and you have means testing.
Yes, exactly.
So that all makes it more difficult. But again, if it's really difficult, then it won't go to the people who need it, who don't contribute to any political campaigns. Instead, it'll be left as a reservoir of money to be able to use on perhaps people who do contribute to political campaigns.
So I want to also talk a little more about the means testing involved, because you have to qualify for the rental assistance. And so there are what appears to be several hoops that people need to jump through. As Dayan writes, one or more individuals in the household must have qualified for unemployment or experienced a reduction in household income or some other financial hardship they can attest to in writing. A risk of homelessness as a result of past due payments must be determined. So people need to be super, super desperate for relief, and they have to apply for this in writing, which can be difficult to do for some people who might not have the resources necessary to apply for this. The household income must be 80% of the area median or below, and those under 50% should be prioritized. With that income determined either for just get the money to the people. Just get the money to the people. And if you end up determining that people who didn't really qualify for that money took it, then just tax them later when they file for their taxes. Like the nickel and diming and the means testing and the delays and the bureaucracy, it's garbage, it's garbage. And look, we're not talking about right-wing lawmakers implementing means testing. If it were up to them, they wouldn't provide any rental relief to begin with. But when it comes to Democrats, they fall for the same like corporate nonsense, right? Which is like, oh, well, you don't want people to like live off the government. You don't want people, fraud's a big problem. No, you know what's a big problem? People getting evicted from their homes in the middle of a pandemic. That's a big problem. Get the money to the people and then worry about taxing them later if they took more than they needed. But no, we gotta do all these delays because we don't have enough homeless people in the country. We don't have enough children living on the streets. No, the lack of democratic leadership here is beyond frustrating, beyond shameful, beyond embarrassing. I mean, they pretend to be the party that looks out for people. They don't look out for people at all. Don't apply means testing to this aid. Just don't. Get the money out there, keep people in their homes.
Now, again, let's give a contrast here. So I know what the conservatives will say, both in the Republican and the conservative party. Well, if you don't do means testing, the people can lie. These poor people can't be trusted. Really, guys, you live in it. Okay, anyways, let's just say that you're one of those skeptical people. Great, well then let's use that skepticism for giant corporations as well. You wanna do that? Remember how the Fed basically printed $4 trillion in the beginning of the COVID crisis and handed it to the largest corporations in the world? Did we say, oh, well, don't give them that, then they'll become lazy bums. And we have to do means testing and we have to do this kind of testing. No, the trillions from the Treasury that went to the largest corporations, they didn't do means testing,
right?
Okay, the money that was printed at the Fed, there was no means testing.
Cenk, they needed liquidity. They needed liquidity. Okay, American people, they don't need liquidity. The big banks, they need liquidity so they can buy shares of their own stock. Liquidity, that's what they need.
Of course, if you said to people, people who might get thrown out of their homes, they actually need liquidity, very literally, okay?
Yeah.
They'd be like, well, I mean, you get what? Just because people need liquidity, you're just gonna give them cash, liquidity meaning cash, right? Yeah. Well, you did it for the big banks and you did it for the big corporations and you did it at literally billions more, trillions more. Oh, no, but I know, but they were really rich, so that's why we had to give them more money. Really? And isn't it amazing that the journalists in this country don't question those double standards? Great piece by David Dayen. Read them more.